The Sunday service was ending when armed men stormed through the sanctuary doors. 200 congregation members froze in terror, but church organist Margaret didn't panic. She'd been waiting 15 years for this moment, ever since she'd retired as Master Sergeant Margaret Stone, Delta Force's most decorated female operative. Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we begin this powerful story of courage, skill, and forgotten heroism, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. Margaret Stone had found peace in the hymns. For 15 years at St. Michael's Community Church, she'd arrived every Sunday at 7:30 a.m. to practice before the 9 a.m. service. Her fingers moved across the organ keys with practiced precision, filling the empty sanctuary with melodies that spoke of redemption and quiet grace. At 52, Margaret was the congregation's most reliable volunteer. She played for weddings, funerals, and every Sunday service without fail. Children loved her because she taught them simple melodies after choir practice. Adults respected her quiet competence and gentle demeanor. What nobody knew was that Margaret's precise finger movements came from years of handling weapons with surgical accuracy. Before she'd played Amazing Grace for grieving families, those same hands had eliminated 47 high-value targets across 6 countries as Master Sergeant Margaret Stone, Delta Force operative. She'd been the unit's first female member to complete the grueling selection process, earning the call sign Stone Cold for her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. For 12 years, she had operated in places that didn't officially exist, completing missions that were never recorded. But that was before the incident in Syria that had ended her military career and sent her searching for a different kind of service. This Sunday morning felt different. Margaret noticed unusual activity in the parking lot during early practice. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, occupants who stayed inside their vehicles instead of entering the church. Her tactical training automatically cataloged details, license plates, positioning, escape routes. During the 9 o'clock service, she spotted 5 men in the back pews who didn't participate in prayers or hymns. They wore heavy coats despite the warm weather, kept checking their phones, and positioned themselves near exits. Margaret's military instincts screamed danger, but she continued playing, watching everything through peripheral vision. Pastor Williams began the closing prayer for 200 congregation members, families with children, elderly couples who'd attended for decades, teenagers from the youth group. Margaret's hands continued moving across the keys, but her mind was calculating tactical possibilities. That's when the sanctuary doors burst open. 5 armed men in tactical gear stormed through the church doors, assault rifles raised, faces covered by masks. The congregation's peaceful Sunday morning dissolved into chaos as screams echoed through the sanctuary. "Nobody move! Everyone down on the ground!" shouted the leader, a tall man with military bearing that Margaret recognized immediately as professional training. Families dropped to the floor, children crying, adults shielding them with their bodies. Pastor Williams raised his hands, trying to maintain calm while elderly Mrs. Peterson collapsed from shock near the front pew. Margaret stopped playing but remained seated at the organ, hands poised over the keys. Her elevated position in the choir loft gave her complete visual of the sanctuary and all 5 intruders. "We want the church-safe combination," the leader announced, pointing his weapon at Pastor Williams. "We know you keep the Sunday collections there, plus the building fund donations. 20 seconds or people start dying." Margaret's trained eyes assessed the tactical situation automatically. 5 hostiles, semi-automatic weapons, positioned to cover all exits. Leader, showing advanced training, likely former military. 2 guards at main entrance, 1 covering the side door, 1 watching the congregation. Leader focused on Pastor Williams. "I don't have the combination," Pastor Williams said, voice steady despite the circumstances. "Only the treasurer, Then get him up here, now. Margaret knew Robert Chen, the church treasurer, was somewhere in the congregation with his wife and 2 young daughters. She also knew the church safe contained exactly $3,247 in cash, hardly worth this level of operation. That's when she realized this wasn't about money. The tactical positioning, the overwhelming force, the military precision, this was a distraction. Something else was happening, probably nearby, and they needed a dramatic incident to draw law enforcement attention. The leader raised his weapon toward the congregation. 10 seconds, Pastor. Then we start with the children. Margaret made a decision that would change everything. Margaret's hands moved across the organ keys, but instead of hymns, she began playing a complex classical piece that required both hands and feet on the pedals. To the congregation, it seemed like she was trying to calm everyone with music. What she was actually doing was using the organ's electrical system to activate the church's emergency lockdown protocol, a security feature installed after recent church shootings. As she played, her fingers found the hidden switches that would lock all doors and activate silent alarms. The leader spun toward her. "Lady, stop playing that thing." "Sorry," Margaret called down, continuing to play. "It helps me stay calm when I'm scared." But Margaret wasn't scared. For the first time in 15 years, Master Sergeant Stone was back in operational mode, and she was calculating how to neutralize 5 armed hostiles while protecting 200 civilians. The organ's position in the elevated choir loft gave her tactical advantages. High ground, cover from the wooden balustrade, and sight lines to every position in the sanctuary. More importantly, she knew every inch of St. Michael's architecture from her security assessments. "Pastor Williams," she called down, her voice carrying subtle authority that made him look up. "Would you like me to play something specific?" Their eyes met, and Margaret saw understanding. Pastor Williams had been an army chaplain before joining civilian ministry. He recognized command presence when he heard it. "Perhaps something appropriate for the situation," he replied carefully. Margaret nodded and began playing "Onward, Christian Soldiers," a hymn that would mask the sounds she was about to make while moving through the choir loft. Using techniques learned in Delta Force, Margaret slipped from the organ bench to the maintenance access behind the choir area. The church's old architecture included servant staircases and utility spaces that connected different levels. She had approximately 4 minutes before the lockdown would trigger police response. 4 minutes to eliminate 5 armed hostiles without civilian casualties. Margaret opened a maintenance panel she'd noticed during 15 years of church service and retrieved items she'd hoped never to need again. Emergency medical supplies, communication equipment, and tools that could be improvised as weapons. Margaret moved through the church's utility spaces with ghost-like silence, using ventilation shafts and maintenance corridors to reach positions behind the armed intruders. Delta Force had taught her that the best weapons were often environmental advantages and psychological pressure. She started with the guard positioned at the side door. Using a technique learned in Syria, Margaret created a small electrical short in the church's lighting system that plunged that section into darkness for exactly 3 seconds. In that brief window, she incapacitated him without a sound. The leader noticed immediately. "Martinez, report from the south door." Silence. "Martinez." Margaret was already moving to the second position. The guard watching the main entrance was getting nervous, turning frequently to check on his missing teammate. Margaret used the church's sound system to create a brief feedback loop, just enough distraction for her to move within striking range. 2 down, 3 remaining. The leader was now shouting orders while the remaining 2 guards tried to maintain control of an increasingly panicked congregation. Children were crying, adults were praying, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Pastor, you've got 30 seconds to open that safe, or I start shooting people." That's when Margaret made her presence known. "Excuse me," she called from the choir loft, her voice calm and authoritative. "Could you gentlemen please leave my church?" All three remaining gunmen spun toward her voice, weapons raised. But Margaret had positioned herself behind the solid oak pulpit structure, using centuries-old craftsmanship as tactical cover. "Lady, get down here now, or what?" Margaret interrupted, her tone carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded special operations units. "You'll shoot up a church full of families? Is that really how you want this to end?" The leader's military training recognized something in her voice. "Who are you?" "I'm Margaret Stone. I play the organ here on Sundays, teach children's choir on Wednesdays, and help with the food bank on Fridays." She paused, letting that sink in. "But 15 years ago, I was Master Sergeant Margaret Stone, Delta Force, and you just made the mistake of threatening my congregation." The sanctuary fell completely silent except for quiet sobbing from frightened children. The three remaining gunmen exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain about their tactical superiority. "That's impossible," the leader said, but his voice carried less conviction. "Is it?" Margaret stepped into view, her posture transformed from gentle church organist to military operator. "Let me tell you what I see. 5-man team, former military training, probably Army Rangers based on your entry technique. This isn't about church money. You're creating a distraction for something else happening nearby." She continued moving, using the elevated choir loft to maintain tactical advantage while keeping the gunman's attention focused on her instead of the congregation. "Your team leader has been checking his watch every 30 seconds, waiting for a signal. Your weapons are clean but well-maintained, professional gear, not street purchases. And you made 3 critical mistakes." "What mistakes?" the leader demanded, trying to regain psychological control. "First, you assumed a church would be soft target with no resistance. Second, you didn't reconnoiter the building properly. This place has more hiding spots than most military compounds. Third, you threatened children in front of someone who spent 12 years protecting people from threats exactly like you." Margaret's hands were no longer visible to the gunman, but the congregation could see her moving with purpose behind the choir area. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "You're going to put down your weapons, walk out those doors, and never come back. Because the alternative is that you discover why Delta Force called me stone cold." The leader raised his rifle toward her position. "Lady, you're about to—" The church lights went out completely. In the darkness that followed, the congregation heard sounds they couldn't identify, quick movements, brief struggles, the soft thud of bodies hitting carpet. When the emergency lighting activated 30 seconds later, all 3 remaining gunmen were unconscious on the sanctuary floor, their weapons secured. Margaret stood calmly at the front of the church, checking Pastor Williams for injuries, while Mrs. Peterson was being helped to a pew by other congregation members. "Is everyone all right?" Margaret asked, her voice gentle again, the military authority tucked away like it had never emerged. Police arrived to find 5 unconscious suspects secured with zip ties that Margaret had produced from emergency supplies. The weapons were collected, statements were taken, and federal agents arrived to investigate what turned out to be a diversion for a planned armored car robbery 3 blocks away. The congregation was released after interviews, but most lingered in the parking lot, processing what they had witnessed. Margaret sat at the organ, playing soft hymns while families comforted their children and processed the morning's events. Pastor Williams approached the choir loft. "Margaret, we need to talk." "I know. 15 years you've been here. 15 years of children's choir, Sunday services, funeral hymns, and all this time." Margaret's hands continued moving across the keys. "I came here looking for peace, Pastor. For a way to serve that didn't involve violence, and you found it. I thought I had. But today reminded me that sometimes peace has to be protected." Pastor Williams sat beside her on the organ bench. "Master Sergeant Stone, I presume." Just Margaret passed her. Master Sergeant Stone served her country and earned her retirement. Margaret Stone serves this congregation and found her calling. Over the following weeks, Margaret's story made national news, but she declined all interview requests. The congregation treated her exactly as they always had, their organist, choir director, and friend. The children still gathered around the organ after services to learn simple melodies. But something had changed in Margaret's playing. The hymns carried deeper resonance, as if she'd found a way to blend her military precision with spiritual purpose. Federal investigators later revealed that the church incident had prevented a multi-million-dollar armored car heist. The 5 suspects were part of a larger organization planning coordinated attacks across the city. Margaret never spoke about the tactical details of that Sunday morning. When reporters asked how a church organist had managed to subdue 5 armed men, she always gave the same answer. I had help from above, and 15 years of practice staying calm under pressure. 6 months later, Margaret received a visit from Colonel Patricia Hayes, her former Delta Force commander. Margaret, we could use someone with your skills for training purposes. Teaching civilian security, church safety protocols, crisis response. Margaret looked around the sanctuary where she'd found peace, then at the children's choir music scattered across the organ bench. Colonel, I appreciate the offer, but I have a job. Sunday services, Wednesday choir practice, Friday food bank. This congregation needs someone who understands that the most important battles are the ones that prevent fighting. She turned back to the organ and began playing Amazing Grace, her fingers moving with the same precision that had once made her Delta Force's most effective operative. Besides, Margaret added with a slight smile, someone needs to be here in case anyone else makes the mistake of threatening my church. Colonel Hayes listened to the hymn, recognizing something she had never heard in Master Sergeant Stone's voice during 12 years of military service. True contentment. Margaret, what if someone else needs help? Margaret finished the hymn and looked at her former commander. Colonel, this is a community church. We serve everyone who comes through those doors. If someone needs help, they know where to find me. Every Sunday at 9 a.m., Wednesday at 7 p.m. for choir practice. Some people serve their country in uniform, carrying weapons through hostile territory. Others serve by creating spaces where peace can flourish, ready to protect that peace when necessary. Margaret Stone had learned that the greatest strength sometimes comes from choosing gentleness, while never forgetting how to fight for what matters most. St. Michael's Community Church still holds services every Sunday at 9 a.m. Margaret still plays the organ, teaches children's choir, and helps with the food bank. But now the church also hosts community safety workshops, and Margaret quietly consults with other congregations about security protocols. Because sometimes the most powerful protection comes from the most unexpected places, and the deadliest guardian is often the one who chooses to serve with hymns instead of weapons, until the moment when innocent lives depend on remembering exactly how to do both. This story was brought to you by Hidden Legends. Heroes walk among us in every profession, often choosing service over recognition, peace over conflict, until the moment when everything they know becomes necessary to protect what they love most.